So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for our March History Sandwiched In. My name is Carrie Lippincott, and I'm the Executive Director of Historic Geneva. Today's presenter is Mel Oles, our Visitor Services and Program Manager at Rose Hill and Johnston House. She will talk about 30 minutes, and then she'll open the floor up for questions. During the program, I'm going to ask that everybody remain on mute. That just cuts back on any background noise. And if you have questions during the program, please put them in the chat and Mel will get to them at the end of the program. Thank you again for joining us and enjoy the program. Mel, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you so much. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started that I'm not an art historian. I don't have my PhD in art history, that I'm using my past experience from other historic sites, exhibits for this program. And I really want to highlight this year's celebration on Robert S. Duncanson. So I was working at home and I had the news on behind me in the background, and it was the inaugural of President Biden. And I saw the painting and I couldn't believe it. It was Duncanson painting. And he was not a well-known painter. And I knew him from working at another historic site where we had an exhibit of him in 2011. And that's how I was introduced to him as a painter. This painting was chosen by Jill Biden, there in blue, the First Lady, and was presented by Republican Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri, there at the stand presenting it. Robert S. Duncanson painting was chosen as the official inaugural painting, and it was displayed at the reception at the U.S. Capitol on Wednesday, January 20th of 2021. And it was a perfect painting of the time. Why is it a perfect painting of the time? Because it portrays hope and peace. The name of the painting is called Landscape with Rainbow of 1859. It shows this young couple strolling through this perfect fertile pasture towards this house at the ends of this rainbow. Often when I was working with, school children, or even the general public, I would tell people, the more you look at Hudson River School painting, the more it gives back to you. So just looking at this, rainbow, he didn't just put it there for any reason. It takes your eye down to that building. If you look hard, you'll notice that there's a house there. So you have this couple taking this really lovely stroll through this most gorgeous landscape towards this house at the end of the rainbow, which is so perfect here for St. Patrick's Day coming up, right? And then you have this cattle walking home towards the cottage. Maybe there's some barns there, and it kind of reinforces the sense that man lives in harmony with nature, right? They're like these well-trained dogs. They don't need any fences. They don't need anyone there to, herd them home. That this landscape's so perfect. The scene is so natural and beautiful that these cows just perfectly walking home to this landscape. This is Duncanson's vision of rural America as Arcadia, this landscape akin to paradise. It's this characteristic. This is a characteristic of his work. And this is right happening before the onset of the Civil War. You'll note here, this painting is done in 1859, and the Civil War will break out here in 1861. So we are celebrating Duncanson for a full year because of this painting, and it is his achievements, all of the things that he did throughout his life. And there is a whole committee that is planning events, programs like today, a coloring contest for school children here locally. And it's through our counties here in New York State, and actually over a few states, even in Michigan, which I'll talk about his influence and that he lived in Michigan. So it's not just us here locally in the Finger Lakes. Today, I'm going to talk about also, who is Duncanson? Why does he matter in art history, American history? I'll explain his impact on the art world then and now. And then I'll also give a couple examples how to learn more if you're interested at the end of the program, if you want to learn more about him and have some further reading. So to just give a little bit of an intro of Duncanson, he was a mid-19th century artist. He was based mostly in Cincinnati, Ohio, which I find interesting because it was the most large and influenced city in Western USA. He was a landscape painter. Yes, he did portraits. He did, still lifes, photography, other types of artwork. But most people consider him a landscape painter, a master landscape painter. He would use landscapes as a metaphor to express American culture identity. He created these pastorals and picturesque views, often imaginary. You'll notice the photo of him on your screen. Photography is invented at this time, and people were snapping photos of American landscapes. So the Hudson River School artists often did imaginary landscapes. They would move mountains, add trees, add rainbows. They weren't doing snapshots like photography. He elevated landscape paintings like Thomas Cole and Asher B. Duran. This was fine American landscape art. Sometimes landscape paintings are not put in the same, I guess you can say, stage as religious art or other types of artwork, but they really elevated these, especially American landscapes at this time period. And at the height of his career, he was called the best landscape painter of the West. He was internationally known, and I'll speak about all of his travels. He traveled to Canada, England, and when he traveled, he was held in very high esteem. And he achieved artistic success despite really oppressive restrictions in which he worked. And I'll speak about this as I get further through my presentation. What I find really remarkable about Duncanson, at this time in his career and in his life, is that there were enslaved people all around him. I have the painting on your screen in front of you, a painting of Cincinnati in Kentucky. In Ohio, they banned slavery in 1851, but in Kentucky, slavery wasn't abolished to 1865. And he was a witness and was seeing this around him, yet he was painting his master works of art and was seeing this and was able to create these works of art, travel and find patrons. So I find this really quite fascinating, and I'll talk more about this. He adapted the style and these metaphors of East Coast landscape paintings. And when I say East Coast, it's really talking about the Hudson River School, Hudson River Valley, New York City. We say East Coast because the next kind of generations would make their way out to what we call Yosemite, West Coast, Bierstadt. And they depict the natural paradise of this new world. Again, this is right after the American Revolutionary War, before the Civil War. America was really kind of this new world. They really romanticized nature, and they saw God in nature, which was very different than other art movements and how people perceived nature. And often, sometimes people thought that nature was scary, was dangerous and things. And the Hudson River School painters sometimes went as far as putting crosses and other things into their landscape. They really projected these images of God in nature. He was very much influenced by literature and the Hudson River School artists, and very much influenced by Thomas Cole, in which I will speak about the art movement. And I'm just going to touch about this briefly. I won't go into too much. This could be a whole program about the Hudson River School itself. It started in 1825, went to the 1870s, and it was actually coined by a critic, like, oh, those Hudson River School painters. It was it wasn't really started by Thomas Cole, wasn't like, I'm going to go out there and start an art movement. He, started with students to help pay, for finances. He was teaching people about his own views, about how he saw landscape. And that's kind of how the art movement started. And it was a celebration of natural beauty of, again, American landscapes, separated from the European school of painting. Again, this was American pride right after the American Revolutionary War. This is sometimes seen as the first American art movement, fine American art movement. And it's really about this American expansion, manifest destiny, this untamed countryside. And I'll show you some paintings of that, kind of showing this limited resources, which to me really sounds American, which sounds like even some things that are relevant to today. Painters explored the nation, not again, just the Hudson River School. They went all over the place, even internationally. And they often returned back to their studio to make these really large scale, huge paintings, multiple series, and people would be, thrilled and in awe by these beautiful paintings of nature. Sometimes they even lit them by candles, special lighting, and people, this is during the beginning of industrial changes of life, and they would see these, rainbows and beautiful landscapes with cows and the countryside. And it really kind of took people back in awe of, wow, this is American landscape. And I can't believe this could be possible, even though a lot of it was imaginary. And Hudson River School painters really depicted perfect kind of crisp lines and depictions of nature. Many people think of Monet, the lily pads and things like that, impressionists. That would come later. These Hudson River School painters really made, almost looks like you could take a photograph, that these look so real. And they really focus both on light and atmosphere. Real quick, the founder is Thomas Cole. He was actually born in England, came over to the United States with his family. If you go to a museum and you see him labeled as an American painter, he actually got his citizenship and became American. His first trip up the Hudson River into the Catskills in 1825. That's why they say that the art movement started in 1825. I'm going to show you a few examples of his work. So you'll see on these sketches, this is a Catskill Falls. It's kind of hard to see. I apologize, they're light. But at the top of your screen, you'll see these little outbuilding, a little viewing where you could look at the falls from above, and a hotel. They're on the top right corners of the drawing. And at this time, this was what the Catskill Falls looked like. Tourist place, tons of people there with picnic baskets. They were coming up from New York City to escape, the industrial changes, factories, things like that. So you have that great image, which I love, ladies with their dresses and their heel shoes, hiking all over these Catskill Falls, right? But then his final piece that Thomas Cole does, all of that, buildings are gone, there's no sign of man. There's no sign of any of that, yet he adds this very stereotyped picture of a Native American in the center, a storm coming on, this wild nature. This looks like very much to me like could be the Catskills or Adirondacks, something that even maybe parts of here are the Finger Lakes. And so this is a very, what I would say, Hudson River School painters, imaginary, removing all the, pieces of where people are and adding this kind of wild nature. Another quick example of a Cole painting that would have definitely influenced Duncanson is the oxbow. The oxbow used to exist, that kind of curve with the river, but it flooded, so it's now just straight. But on the one part of your screen, you have that wild nature, the storms coming in, It almost looks like the tree in the front got broken maybe by a hurricane. And then on the other side, you have these farmlands. You can tell that man's been there, peaceful. And then Thomas Cole actually puts himself in this painting. He is in the wilderness part, and it's kind of hard to see on your screen, but he's in the bottom center, and he's wearing a little top hat, and he's looking back at you with his painting supplies, but he's put himself in the nature part because he wants to be part of that wild nature, really kind of symbolizing the wild part of American countryside. So this is what Duncanson is really being influenced. He would have seen these paintings, he would have known these paintings, and he would have been very much influenced also by Asher B. Duran. There's a second generation of Hudson River School painters, and Asher B. Duran was the president of the National Academy of Design. And in this painting, this is one of my ultimate favorites. It's, you're going down this winding little road here towards this lake with the sunset or the sunrise, with this beautiful job of light and dark with the trees. And this would very much influence Duncanson. So to give a little bio on Duncanson, he is born in 1821. We're not 100% sure on the exact date, but he's born in Fayette, New York. His parents and grandparents moved up from Virginia, and in the census, they list him as mulatto, mixed races, and they work as carpenters and painters. After the American Revolutionary War, the government made these military tracts, and we believe Duncanson's grandfather may have inherited some of these for his freedom in exchange for military service. And that's how we believe he might have come up to this area. I took a screenshot of this from Joe Kettner, who is the leading, I would say, I think the leading scholar of Duncanson. Sad to say that he has passed away, Kettner. But just to say that there is so much on the internet and been published about and not accurate information of Duncanson. So I like to put this in of, it's just so hard to find out what really happened to Duncanson. Maybe someday we'll find a journal or more information hidden in someone's attic. But at this moment, all we have are some census records of how to figure out what exactly happened when Duncanson was younger. We know though, they moved to Michigan after his grandfather dies, and they go to Erie. It was really a prosperous community. He would have been around the age 16, and he starts as a house painter. On your screen, there is an advertisement for becoming a painter. And we believe that becoming a craftsman, he would have learned how to mix paints, prepare surfaces, and this is kind of him preparing him as becoming a professional artist. He does this for a little while before he takes the next step and moves to Cincinnati and becomes a professional painter. Again, working as a painter, a house painter, that would have helped his skills, but he really wanted to become a landscape painter. In 1840, he moved to Mount Healthy, a small but thriving neighborhood in Cincinnati, and it was the center of abolitionists along with free African Americans. And in 1840 in Cincinnati, the population was about 43,000, and about 3,000 were African Americans. And most of them were previously enslaved. And in Cincinnati, it was some of the most severe race riots during antebellum North. So he was living in that time period. This landscape with sheep done, we don't know the date, was inspired by the countryside around him at this time in his home in Cincinnati. And it's just a painted domestic scene of the farmland, really emphasizing beauty, perfection, nature, and kind of this relationship of man. I would say it's almost kind of tipping the scale of perfection. I mean, it's almost over the top. I would love to wake up to a scene like that. And a scene like this would be very popular to 19th century Americans, because again, going back to, this is kind of the start of industrial living, and people would want to have scenes like this in their houses as their lives are changing around them. So one of his most famous works was done for Nicholas Longworth. He was another I can't talk right now. Anti-slave and was working for a wealthy Cincinnati landowner, and helped expand Duncanson's artist career in Ohio. And in 1851, Longworth commissioned Duncanson to paint these 8 elaborate landscape murals on the second floor of his home. This would actually turn into the Taft Museum of Art. I have not seen these myself. I would love to do this trip someday and see these myself. And at one point, these were the largest, most ambitious in his career, and the largest murals done at this time in a house. I had a hard time trying to find images to portray how large and beautiful these are, because to do 8 in a house. There's beautiful landscapes. So now in the 1850s, Duncanson, because of that commission that he got from that, he would go on a 9-month tour to England and France. And in England, he would particularly be attracted to the landscapes of Claude Lorraine and J.M. Turner, very the same as Thomas Cole and other Hudson River School painters. And this is just as the Civil War is starting to break out. He would paint this landscape of lotus eaters. And it was inspired by Tennyson and Homer. And it's a very large scale landscape. And it's populated with the African Americans and tending to the needs of these white soldiers, which are on the land, and then the African Americans are kind of in the water. And at this time, this painting is hailed as a masterpiece, and it's kind of seen as the struggle to save the Union and end slavery. This is done right in 1861. And this is kind of known as one of his best and masterpieces. And I wish it was in the United States to be able to view this in person. It's hard to have these do justice on screen. So again, Duncanson is traveling abroad and does scenes of Scotland and Great Britain. And he doesn't have as many strengths, as an African American at this time traveling in Europe as he does in the United States, especially because again, the Civil War is happening. And he does these kind of idealized landscapes. Here, this Loch Long in Scotland, where he's romanticizing the scene. Again, doing this harmony of, America is thinking again of just, having this freedom. You really get that sense. If it didn't have that title, to me, I would almost think maybe not the Adirondacks, because those mountains are a little too large, but maybe a little farther out west. It could look like an American landscape. Duncanson would make, a couple of these trips within Scotland, and we believe maybe because of his inspired by his father's Scottish heritage. And he's very much influenced by novels and poems written by Sir Walter Scott. Like many artists, even today, inspired by other mediums. At this time, many artists were inspired by literature, poems, because again, they didn't have internet and media like we do today to be inspired by. That was their other forms of media to have go along with their paintings. And in this one, very similar to the last one with the rolling mountains and trees and water, is again this warm and rich vegetation, compared to another painting that I'm going to show here in a couple slides. Again, to me, it could look very much like an American landscape, maybe too big for the Adirondacks. And he does these kind of panoramic views to also show the vastness of these landscapes, which reminds me of another Hudson River School artist, Bierstadt, who is painting to show the splendor. They were very romantic about these. And at this time with these paintings, he's getting international recognition. And not many other artists are traveling and doing this at the same time. And I like to compare it to this painting, which I find so different compared to the other ones. In this, I just find that it's a tropical scene, and that the mountain almost looks architecturally. It looks almost like a kind of a castle, compared to his other ones that were like these rolling mountains. And this one, it almost looks like we have this mountain is kind of castle. It's more of a structure, so different from his other ones. And that is very much the vocal point. It's more of a tropical landscape compared to his other ones. So a lot of people, when they speak about Duncanson, bring in race and talk about his life. I'm only going to speak about it briefly, because I feel like his artwork is a master. He's a master painter, and it can speak for itself. And his race is, not as an important issue, besides that he's living in such a time that it's amazing that he's able to paint and travel and do all of these, find these patrons and sell these works of art. But it is interesting to look at his artwork and compare it to the other Hudson River School painters, that he does add in African-American people. Here in this Uncle Tom and Little Ava, this was painted for a commission for after the Harriet Beecher Stowe novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, in 1852. That was the novel was printed. So he does, when people ask, he does do these commissions, but he doesn't do a lot of these. He does, what I find this really interesting though, he does create a 600-yard wide panorama to portray the horrors of human bondage, and it tours the US for several years. So it's rolled up, and as one side unrolls, the other one rolls, and they light it with sound, or they light it and there's sound, and there's a narration. And it starts with the slave trade beginning in Africa, talks about slave markets, and then ends with this escape from Mississippi to Canada. And it's very sad because it was lost in time, and they only know it survived, it existed because there was the scripts of the narration. So they know that he painted a 600-yard. Like, I wish we had some type of evidence of what it looked like. So he was part of anti-slavery movement, anti-slavery societies. It was part of his life, but I just wish that existed. And comparing him back to like maybe a Thomas Cole or Ashley Duran, here in the center of the painting, you have that house. It's large, it's taking up a considerable amount of the painting. And he does put African Americans in the center. He's drawing attention to them, compared to, another painter. He is putting them in as subject matters. So in the late 1860s, Duncanson starts to suffer from dementia. Even though he's physically okay, his mental health starts to suffer. there's a lot of rumors and myths that talk about maybe it's because of the lead paint that he used so much when he was doing house painting. I don't know if any of that would ever be able to be proven. But he started having these outbursts, kind of erratic behaviors and things. And his really mental health started to really fail. And he was placed in a sanitarium in Detroit, Michigan, following a seizure in 1872. And he died there in December of 1872 and was buried in a cemetery in Monroe, Michigan. And it was unmarked officially. And then in 2019, there was a group of people who got together, raised money, and put together this headstone for him because there started to be a really big new interest in him. When he was alive, of course, people knew about him. And then he kind of faded into history, and now there has become, again, a new interest in him in both history and art history. So real quick, legacy. So many art historians really put him in a new place because, he was an African-American in a certain time, able to become a master painter. I mean, during the Civil War, traveling, finding these patrons and doing, these slides don't do it justice at all, because you're not seeing the literally size of the work of art, the detail, the texture of the paintings. Duncanson rose above racial oppression, prejudice. He was able to express African-American culture and identity, and it was able to pursue a career in paint and in the arts and painting. He was a self-taught, we believe, a self-taught landscape artist who was able to kind of go and find patrons and pursue that, and kind of live life with, without limits, in this life with, roles of enslaved people and labor all around him, especially in Cincinnati, and really propelled himself to be a master painter, which is really quite incredible. I wish a diary or something survived of what was in his mind and what he saw. So we are promoting things like to come to our places like Rose Hill or the History Museum here in Geneva to be inspired to draw yourself or to look at the artwork that we have on display, to learn about more of the different artists that we have here at our site. We also have other people like Walt Gabriel, who is writing articles, doing other programs around the area, promoting Duncanson. And I apologize for this really poor picture. This is just supposed to be a draft, but there is a new historical marker that's going to be placed somewhere in Seneca County. A celebration will happen in May. There'll be press, you'll see about that. It was funded by Seneca County, that will mark, give or take, where Duncanson was born, to kind of really celebrate it, that he was born here in the Finger Lakes. And to learn more, these were both written by Joseph Kettner, and I think he's one of the best scholars of Robert S. Duncanson. And these are two, if you want to read more about him, I would promote these as two great references. And thank you so much for today. And I really appreciate you taking the time to come and listen to me talk about him today.
Thank you, Mel. Once again, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, and there are some questions. The first one is, how can we learn about the artist Duncanson may have influenced?
Just
Would
one
that be
second.
covered? Yeah, would that be covered in perhaps one of the books that you mentioned?
I would say, yeah, I would check out the two books. Um, I can't think of like a contemporary artist right off the top of my head, who, who would say Duncanson, I am 100% influenced by him. But I would say he opened up the door for so many people to follow in his footsteps. He's the first. And so I apologize that I don't have someone right off the top of my head um, of knowing someone.
Okay. The next question, any outreach to Dr. Jill Biden and or the Smithsonian about this year-long celebration of Duncanson?
Yes, I believe the Duncanson committee has reached out to both and has not heard back, but we have, the group in Monroe, Michigan, other groups locally that we're working with, but we have not heard back from Dr. Joe Biden or the Smithsonian, because we thought how great would that be, but no.
Okay. Any
Unless,
plans?
does anyone have a contact?
Yes. Any plans for an exhibit or retrospective of his work this year at a major museum? I will say this, I do know this, the Smithsonian Art Museum and also the Cincinnati Art Museum all have their Duncanson works digitized. So I'm sure if you can simply go like to Google, type in Robert Duncanson, those sites will instantly pop up. The Smithsonian has an incredible collection, I think, of over 20 of his works.
Yep.
But do you know of any exhibits that could be coming up?
Not like a major show dedicated just to Duncanson, no. I know in the last couple of years, they've started to, put his paintings in the, more exhibits and things like that, but not off the top of my head. No, I apologize.
Oh, this is a really good question. Did he sign all his paintings? Might there still be other paintings out there by him that aren't noted at this point? That's a good question. Yeah. That's a really good question.
Is a good question, because I can't remember if I saw the back of them. Give me a minute. So not to like compare him, because I don't like that. That's not always like the greatest word to use, but to like Thomas Cole, like, has a catalog and, a resume of like all of his work. And I almost feel like to some extent, maybe all of his work, maybe we'll find once in a while, something will come up. But with Duncanson, I feel like there's a good chance that still things will be discovered with him, because so much effort has been put into certain artists, of course, because Thomas Cole was like the founder and certain things like that. But because Duncanson has come back onto so many people's radars, and he has become such an interest once again for both, being a second generation Hudson River School, for being a landscape painter in the 1860s, for being, in Cincinnati, Ohio, the best of the Western at that time period, that I definitely think there could be more paintings that come out. I feel like he did sign them. I just can't remember how. I feel like they're probably well documented, probably on the back. I just can't remember how he did, but I recommend, again, sorry to say, same answer to probably all of these, is the Kettner book. Joe Kettner, he was one of the first people to start really bringing him back onto everyone's radars, I want to say in the 80s. And just that one book that can I go back?
Yeah, I was just going to recommend if you could go back to that screen.
Whoops.
That's okay.
I have too many things open. The Emergence of the African American Artist. I mean, that book is just, everyone reference it. I mean, he's the one that went through the census and found everything, and just the detail of information and research that he did.
So what you're saying is, rather than signing them on the front, you think he might have signed them on the back of his works?
Or it would be documented on the back of, who the first patron was or what have you. But to be honest with you, I can't. Isn't this terrible? The exhibit was back in 2011 and I can't remember.
Yeah.
I'm like, we could try to zoom into some of these images.
Oh, do them ourselves. Yeah.
But that's a good question. I can't remember.
Yeah. Okay. No. That's all the questions that are in the chat. Does anybody else have a question? We're a small group. If you want to unmute yourself. Any other questions? No, thank you again, Mel. And if anybody is interested, again, you can look at the Joseph Kettner. I'm assuming you can find that on Amazon.
Mhm.
And again, the Smithsonian, I think it's the Smithsonian American Art Museum and the Cincinnati Art Museum. They have Duncansons, which they have digitized and you can find on their website. So thank you so much, Mel, for sharing Duncanson's story with us. And thank all of you for joining us. That concludes today's program, and we'll be doing History Sandwiched in April. So stay tuned for details coming up about that program. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.